First contact and confusion. High Admiral Vextar of the Raxan Empire stood aboard the bridge of the Stellar Dominance, his flagship and pride of the Imperial fleet. His iridescent scales gleamed under the efficient lighting of the command center as he studied the holographic display before him. After centuries of expansion and countless first contacts, the Raxans had developed what they considered a flawless system for categorizing and engaging with new civilizations. But Earth was proving different. High Admiral, his second-in-command, Commander Zix, reported with characteristic precision, "We've detected their primary defense fleet. Preliminary scans indicate." She paused, double-checking her readings. "Chemical propulsion and minimal shielding. They appear to be using primitive radio waves for communication." Vextar's secondary eyes blinked in amusement, while his primary pair remained fixed on the tactical display. The human vessels looked almost artistic in their inefficiency, all sharp angles and exposed hull plating, with visible thrusters and what appeared to be actual windows. His crew had spotted them performing what seemed to be routine patrol maneuvers near their lunar satellite. "Send the standard greeting package," Vextar ordered, settling into his command chair. "Include the technological superiority demonstration." The demonstration had been refined over generations of first contact scenarios. A precise, calculated display of the Raxan Empire's advanced capabilities that typically resulted in immediate submission, or at least appropriate awe. The massive Raxan fleet, comprising 30 of their most impressive vessels, arranged itself in the traditional dominance formation. Energy fields shimmered as their ships synchronized, creating a mesmerizing display of power that had caused more than one civilization to surrender on sight. The response from Earth came almost immediately. It was a video transmission, showing what appeared to be their command center. Vextar leaned forward, expecting to see panic or at least concern on the faces of the primitive species. Instead, he saw humans in what looked like casual attire, some holding beverages, watching his fleet's display with what could only be described as amused interest. Their commander, a woman with silver-streaked hair tied back in a simple knot, actually appeared to be eating something while watching. "Fascinating light show," she said, taking another bite. "I particularly enjoyed the synchronized shield modulation. Very festive. We haven't done formation dancing since the Academy Centennial celebration. Would you like to see some of our old routine videos?" Vextar's scales shifted color in confusion. "You seem to be misunderstanding the situation," he responded, his translator providing what he hoped was an appropriately intimidating tone. "The Raxan Empire has claimed this sector. Your species has two options: immediate surrender and integration, or..." He was interrupted by laughter. Not nervous laughter, not the kind of laughter his species used to show submission. This was genuine amusement. "Oh, honey," the human commander said, wiping her eyes, "you really should have done more research before this little demonstration. Would anyone like to explain to our guests why their scan readings were a bit off?" A younger human, who appeared to be drinking something hot from a container marked "World's Okayest Engineer," raised her hand. "Their sensors are only capable of detecting what we want them to see. Those chemical thrusters. They're decorative. We keep them because they look cool and make great selfie backgrounds. The radio waves. That's just for our retro communications hottie group." Vextar's scales were now cycling through colors so rapidly that Commander Zix quietly adjusted the bridge's anti-seizure filters. "Impossible," he stated. "Our scanning technology is the most advanced in known space. We can detect quantum fluctuations across light years." "Admirable," the human commander responded. "Tell you what, since you came all this way for a demonstration, why don't we give you one? Lieutenant Chen, would you mind showing them what our training vessels can do?" Before Vextar could respond, one of the seemingly primitive human ships broke formation. It was one of their smallest vessels, barely the size of a Raxan scout ship. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then every system on the Stellar Dominance went dark. Emergency power kicked in after several seconds, But Vextar's mighty flagship was now floating in space, about as maneuverable as a comet. Around him, 29 other ships of the mighty Raxan fleet were in similar states of confusion. "Don't worry," the human commander's voice came through somehow, despite all their communications being down. "We just temporarily reversed your power gradient. Everything will reset in about 5 minutes. We figured this would be easier to understand than trying to explain why your sensors can't actually detect our real ships." "Your real ships?" Vextar managed to ask. "Oh yes," she replied cheerfully. "The ones you're seeing are what we call our welcome wagon. Vintage designs we keep around for meeting new civilizations. We find it's more polite than showing up in our actual fleet. That tends to cause existential crisis." As promised, power returned to the Raxan fleet 5 minutes later. Vextar found himself staring at his tactical display with entirely new eyes. The seemingly primitive human vessels now felt like carefully crafted masks, and he had a distinct sensation that he was seeing exactly what the humans wanted him to see. Nothing more, nothing less. "Now then," the human commander said, finally finishing her snack, "would you like to start over? Perhaps with a proper introduction this time. We find diplomatic relations work much better when everyone's being honest about their capabilities." For the first time in his long career, High Admiral Vextar of the mighty Raxan Empire found himself wondering if perhaps the standard first contact protocols needed some revision. The art of underestimation. The next 12 hours aboard the Stellar Dominance were filled with increasingly frantic activity as the Raxan fleet's best technicians attempted to understand what exactly had happened to their systems. High Admiral Vextar had retreated to his private command chamber, his scales now stuck in an uncomfortable shade of confused mauve. "Impossible," Chief Engineer Nax muttered for what seemed like the 1,000th time, her claws tapping rapidly on her datapad. "Their training vessel didn't emit any form of energy we could detect. It didn't generate any fields, didn't fire any weapons. It just looked at us, and our systems decided to take a nap." Commander Zix, who had been quietly documenting everything for the inevitable report to Imperial Command, looked up from her station. "Perhaps we should consider the possibility that the humans are being truthful about their technological capabilities." "That would mean," Vextar said slowly, "that everything we thought we knew about technological progression is wrong. No species could advance from chemical propulsion to whatever this is without being noticed by the Empire." A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. The human commander's face appeared on their screen, still looking frustratingly relaxed. "Hello again. Just checking in to see how your diagnostics are going. We noticed you trying to figure out what happened, and Lieutenant Chen feels a bit bad about not explaining the process. Would you like a copy of Quantum Mechanics for Beginners? It's from our elementary school curriculum, but it should help explain the basics." Vextar's scales shifted through 3 different shades of embarrassment before he managed to respond. "You teach your children about quantum mechanics?" "Oh, that's just the starter course," she replied with a warm smile. "They need to understand the fundamentals before they can start their proper physics education. Speaking of education, we'd love to invite your crew to observe some of our actual training exercises. We're doing routine drills with our academic fleet today." "Academic fleet?" Chief Engineer Nax asked, unable to contain her curiosity. "Yes, the ships we use to teach our university students. Nothing too fancy, just basic dimensional manipulation and causality maintenance. We find hands-on experience is the best teacher. Would you like to watch?" Before Vextar could formulate a response, space itself seemed to ripple around one of the human vessels. Where moments before there had been what looked like a primitive warship, there was now something else. The human vessel's outer hull had transformed, revealing layers of technology that made the most advanced Raxan sensors simply give up and display error messages. "That's the HMS Pythagoras," the human commander explained casually. "One of our older teaching vessels. The students are practicing basic space-time fabric manipulation today. Don't worry if your sensors are getting a bit confused. They're not really designed to process 11-dimensional objects. The Raxan crew watched in stunned silence as the human academic vessel proceeded to demonstrate what appeared to be complete mastery over the fundamental forces of the universe. It folded space like origami, created and dismissed microsingularities like soap bubbles, and at one point seemed to exist in 3 different time periods simultaneously. Most impressive, Vextar managed to say, his diplomatic training kicking in despite his shock. Your species clearly has much to teach us. Oh, this is nothing. The human commander waved dismissively. You should see what our actual military vessels can do. But we find that tends to make other species a bit uncomfortable. Last time we showed our full capabilities to a new civilization, they developed what they called cosmic imposter syndrome and didn't come out of their home system for a decade. Chief Engineer Nax, who had been frantically taking notes, suddenly looked up. Wait, are you saying this isn't your military fleet? Goodness, no, the commander laughed. These are all civilian vessels, research ships, teaching vessels, a few private yachts. The Pythagoras, there is practically an antique. We keep it around mostly for its historical value. It's from all the way back in 2157. The implications of that statement sent another wave of color changes rippling through the Raxan crew. Their own most advanced vessels had been developed in what humans would apparently consider ancient history. I believe, Commander Zix said carefully, that we should reconsider our standard approach to this situation. High Admiral, perhaps instead of discussing terms of surrender, we should be requesting an educational exchange program. Vextar nodded slowly, his scales finally settling into a thoughtful blue-green. Commander, he addressed the human, would your species be willing to teach us? The human commander's smile widened. Now that's the kind of question we love to hear. Of course we'll teach you. Education and sharing knowledge is kind of our thing. In fact, she glanced at something off-screen. We're about to break for lunch. Would you like to join us? We can discuss the details over food, and I promise our cafeteria replicators are set to accommodate Raxan biology. And so, the mighty Raxan Empire's first official diplomatic interaction with humanity was scheduled around a lunch break. As Vextar prepared to board a shuttle to the human vessel, he couldn't help but wonder what other surprises these deceptively casual beings had in store. Behind the curtain, the human vessel's cafeteria was not what Vextar had expected. Like everything else about humanity, it somehow managed to be both casually welcoming and technologically mind-bending. The space itself seemed to adjust its dimensional properties to comfortably accommodate both human and Raxan physiologies, while maintaining what the humans call a cozy diner atmosphere. The food replicators can create anything you'd like, Commander Sarah Chen, as she had finally introduced herself, explained while leading them to a table. They're connected to our culinary database, which includes every known recipe from Earth and about 300 other civilizations. Chief Engineer Nax was staring at her table setting with professional fascination. These eating utensils, they're responding to my biological structure. Oh yes, Lieutenant Chen, the one responsible for their earlier power system embarrassment, grinned. They're basic smart matter. Nothing fancy, just standard cafeteria equipment. They adjust to whatever appendages you happen to have. Vextar watched as his own utensils smoothly transformed to accommodate his species' unique grip requirements. You use this level of technology for eating implements. Well, we find it's more polite than expecting visitors to adapt to our tools, Commander Chen replied, settling into her chair. Besides, it's a good way to introduce new species to our technology gradually. Speaking of which, would anyone like to see how the replicators work? Before anyone could respond, a student, apparently late for lunch, rushed into the cafeteria. What caught the Raxan's attention wasn't her hurry, but rather the fact that she seemed to be carrying what looked like a small galaxy in a jar. Sorry I'm late, she called out to her friends. The quantum physics practical ran long. Nobody told us we'd be creating pocket universes today. She carefully set the jar on a nearby table, where it quietly began developing its own laws of physics. Commander Zix's datapad, which had been dutifully recording everything, simply displayed EROR. Reality EED's documentation parameters. Ah, the freshman projects get more ambitious every year, Commander Chen noted with nostalgic amusement. I remember when we just had to model theoretical particle interactions. Now they're building whole universes. Would anyone like to try the spaghetti? The replicator makes an excellent marinara sauce. The meal that followed was possibly the most surreal experience of Vextar's long career. Around them, human students and faculty casually discussed concepts that would revolutionize Raxan science, all while enjoying what they called comfort food. A professor at a nearby table was using what appeared to be a small black hole as a paperweight while grading assignments. I have to ask. Chief Engineer Nax finally spoke up, her professional curiosity overwhelming her diplomatic restraint. How did your species advance so quickly? Our historical records show no indication of such technological development in this sector. Commander Chen dabbed her mouth with a napkin that might or might not have been temporarily borrowing its matter from another dimension. Oh, that's simple. We're really good at learning from our mistakes, and we love to experiment. Plus, we found that a lot of the universe's fundamental laws are more like friendly suggestions once you understand how to talk to them politely. Talk to them politely, Vextar repeated slowly. Mum. Chen nodded. Turns out the universe really appreciates good manners. But that's getting into theoretical physics territory, and I promised not to overwhelm you on the first day. Would anyone like dessert? The ice cream printer is working again after that slight temporal hiccup last week. As if to demonstrate, a student at the next table was enjoying what appeared to be ice cream that existed in a quantum superposition of all possible flavors simultaneously. I think, Commander Zix said carefully, while watching the students somehow eat a probability field, that we may need to significantly revise our understanding of everything. That's the spirit. Commander Chen beamed. The first step to learning is admitting how much you don't know. Now about that educational exchange program you mentioned. We'd be happy to start with some basic courses. Nothing too challenging at first, just fundamental reality manipulation, basic quantum engineering, and perhaps an introduction to trans-dimensional physics. We find it's best to build a solid foundation before getting into the really interesting stuff. Vextar, who had been quietly trying to process everything he'd seen, finally asked the question that had been bothering him since their first interaction. Why are you willing to share all this with us, even after we approached your system with conquest in mind? Commander Chen's expression softened. Because that's what humanity does. We learn, we grow, and we share. Besides, she added with a twinkle in her eye, you haven't even seen our library yet. Wait until you discover what we did with the Dewey Decimal System. Advanced Studies. The library, as it turned out, was not a room or even a building. It was, as Chief Engineer Nax would later write in her increasingly surreal report, an exercise in recursive architecture that makes topology cry. We had to fold space a bit to fit all the books. The head librarian, Dr. Maya Patel, explained as she led the Raxan delegation through what appeared to be an infinite series of interconnected reading rooms. Physical books are a bit old-fashioned, but we find they help maintain a tangible connection to knowledge. Plus, they're quite cozy. Vextar noticed that some of the books seemed to be reading themselves, while others appeared to be engaged in quiet academic debates with each other. A particularly thick volume about theoretical physics was apparently conducting its own experiments in a corner. Your books are alive? Commander Zix asked, watching a chemistry textbook demonstrate a complex reaction sequence in midair. Oh, not exactly, Dr. Patel replied. They're just enthusiastic about sharing information. We found that knowledge tends to get a bit restless if you keep it too static. These are mostly basic texts, though. The really advanced books are kept in the non-Euclidean section. As if on cue, A door that hadn't existed a moment ago opened to reveal a reading room that seemed to operate under its own set of physical laws. Inside, a group of human students were casually taking notes while floating in what appeared to be a localized bubble of alternative mathematics. "That's our sophomore study group," Dr. Patel explained. "They're reviewing multidimensional calculus. We find it's easier to understand when you can actually see all 11 dimensions at once." Chief Engineer Nax, who had been scribbling notes frantically, suddenly stopped. "Wait, this is a university library. Where do you keep your military technical documents?" The librarian laughed softly. "Oh, those are much simpler. We find that military technology works best when it doesn't try to overcomplicate things. Our defense systems mostly run on applied common sense. It's far more efficient than trying to bend reality too much." A nearby book, apparently sensing their conversation, helpfully opened itself to display what looked like basic human military principles. The Raxans leaned in to read, only to discover that their most advanced military theories were listed under Historical Misconceptions, a beginning guide. "I think," Vextar said slowly, "we would be very interested in enrolling some of our people in your educational programs." "Wonderful," Dr. Patel beamed. "We love having exchange students. We'll start you with the basics: fundamental reality manipulation, practical quantum mechanics, and, of course, proper library etiquette. The books can be quite particular about that last one." As if to demonstrate, a nearby etiquette guide straightened itself primly on its shelf. "What about your advanced technology?" Chief Engineer Nax asked. "Surely you don't share everything with newcomers." "Share? My dear, we practically beg people to learn this stuff," Dr. Patel replied. "Do you know how hard it is to find good conversation partners when you're the only species in your sector that understands trans-dimensional physics? Besides, the universe is too interesting not to share. Just last week, one of our doctoral students discovered an entirely new set of physical laws hidden in what we thought was empty space. Turned out the void was just being shy." Commander Zix, whose data pad had given up trying to categorize what it was witnessing and was now displaying what appeared to be an existential crisis in binary, finally asked the question that had been bothering all of them. "But aren't you worried about other species using this knowledge against you?" The humans in the room, students, faculty, and Dr. Patel herself, all shared an amused look. "Let me show you something," Dr. Patel said, leading them to a peculiar section of the library, where the books seemed to exist in a quantum superposition of every language ever spoken. "This is our conflict resolution section. Humans learned a long time ago that the most powerful weapon isn't technology, it's understanding. The more you learn about how the universe actually works, the more you realize that conflict is just a primitive way of dealing with ignorance." She gestured to a book that was simultaneously a peace treaty and a physics theorem. "Once you understand how to fold space, manipulate time, and create pocket universes, you also understand why using that knowledge for violence is rather missing the point. It's like using a quantum computer to play tic-tac-toe." The Raxans watched as a group of human children ran past, chasing what appeared to be a mathematical proof that had escaped from their textbook. The proof was giggling. A new understanding. 3 months after their first contact with humanity, High Admiral Vextar stood before the Raxan Imperial Council, his scales a confident shade of iridescent blue. Behind him, a human quantum display showed real-time footage of the ongoing cultural exchange program. "Distinguished council members," he began, "I stand before you today not as a conqueror, but as a student. What we have learned from humanity in these past months has fundamentally changed our understanding of not just technology, but of our place in the universe." On the display, a group of Raxan engineers was attending their first class in basic reality manipulation. One of them had just successfully convinced a quantum particle to exist in 2 places at once, purely by asking it politely. "The humans call themselves a Type 2.5 civilization," Vextar continued. "When we asked why not Type 3, they laughed and said they're still working on their thesis. We thought they were joking. They weren't. Commander Zix, now the official liaison to Earth's educational institutions, stepped forward. Her datapad had finally accepted its new reality and was now happily processing 11-dimensional data streams. Their children learn as recreation what our most advanced scientists couldn't even theorize. But more importantly, they've shown us a different way of approaching the galaxy. The display shifted to show the HNS Pythagoras, now hosting a joint human-Raxan science class. A Raxan student had just successfully created their first temporal loop, while their human instructor offered supportive advice about maintaining causality integrity. The humans have offered to help upgrade our entire fleet, Chief Engineer Nax reported, her scales shimmering with excitement. Not because they have to, but because, in their words, commuting through normal space is so last millennium. They've already helped us modify our engines to bypass several laws of physics that, apparently, were more like guidelines anyway. The council chamber erupted in murmurs as the implications sank in. Centuries of Raxan expansion policy, based on technological superiority and military might, had been rendered obsolete not by force, but by an afternoon chat over coffee and quantum mechanics. There's more, Vextar continued. The humans have proposed a joint academic exchange program. They want to establish what they call a community college of the cosmos. The curriculum would be open to all species, regardless of their technological level. The display showed plans for a learning institution that existed simultaneously across multiple star systems, held together by what the humans called applied academic enthusiasm and a really good library catalog system. But what of our empire's standing? One council member asked. How can we maintain our authority when such power exists beyond our control? Commander Chen, who had been quietly watching from a corner that might or might not have been borrowing space from another dimension, stepped forward. If I may address the council, she smiled. We've found that authority based on knowledge and understanding tends to last longer than authority based on power. Your empire has an opportunity to become something greater, not a conqueror of worlds, but a facilitator of growth. She gestured, and the quantum display expanded to show a map of the galaxy. Thousands of points of light represented civilizations at various stages of development. Every species has something to teach and something to learn. The Raxan's organizational skills and diplomatic experience could help us establish learning centers across the galaxy. Instead of subjects, you could have students. Instead of conquered territories, you could have campuses. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Generations of imperial doctrine were being challenged not by weapons or warfare, but by an invitation to learn. Besides, Chen added with a twinkle in her eye, we're working on some really interesting theories about the nature of reality, and we could use more perspectives. Just last week, one of your engineering students suggested a fascinating approach to trans-dimensional coffee brewing that we'd never considered. Vextar's scales shifted to a thoughtful green as he addressed the council one final time. Distinguished members, I stand before you not as the High Admiral who left to conquer Earth, but as someone who has glimpsed a greater destiny for our people. The humans have shown us that the true final frontier isn't space, it's understanding. The council chamber's quantum display chose that moment to demonstrate a small but enthusiastic interpretation of higher dimensional physics, causing several council members' chairs to briefly exist in multiple probability states. See, Chen grinned, even the laws of physics agree, and they're usually quite conservative about these things. As the Raxan Imperial Council debated their species' new direction, a small group of human and Raxan students sat in Earth's infinite library, sharing stories and solving quantum equations. One of them had just discovered that humor was actually a fundamental force of the universe, which explained a lot about humanity's approach to, well, everything. And somewhere in the great cosmic dance, in a quiet corner of space-time, a particularly self-aware fundamental particle wrote a note in the margins of reality. Humans, they don't just think outside the box. They teach the box how to transcend its own existence. And they do it all with a smile and a really good cup of coffee.